All right, so getting ready for this deep dive took me down a bit of a rabbit hole, honestly. We're talking Ukraine, obviously, but what I found goes way beyond, the typical headlines. It's like this conflict is magnifying glass or something showing us these huge shifts globally that are happening right now, whether we realize it or not. It's heavy stuff, no doubt, but stick with us. By the end, you'll understand this bigger picture of the Ukraine war, the human cost, obviously, but also these global power plays at work and, yeah, even what it could mean for like your wallet down the line. So let's just dive right in. One article I came across really hit me hard. It mentions Colonel Douglas McGregor, and he estimates over 600,000 people have already died in this thing. 600,000. I mean, that's more than some city's entire population.
It's a staggering number,
Yeah.
absolutely staggering, and it really hits home the human cost of this whole thing. We get caught up in the statistics, the battle maps, all that, but each one of those 600,000 is a life lost, a family torn apart, just a massive tragedy. No other way to put it.
And the tragedy is it's not contained to Ukraine itself either, right? The source argues that this level of devastation, like it's creating these ripple effects, and specifically with global migration patterns.
Yeah, exactly. You see the images of Ukrainians fleeing the fighting, obviously. But what's really fascinating and tragic at the same time is how this conflict connects to migration worldwide. The source brings up Lebanon, for example. They're looking at something like 1 million people displaced now. And a lot of that instability traces back to the Syrian conflict, which we all remember had its own external players involved.
So it's like dominoes almost. One conflict going, then knocking over the next, sending people across borders.
Precisely. And it's not just Lebanon. Turkey's dealing with, what, 3 to 4 million refugees already? Many from Syria, Afghanistan, and this mass migration. It's fueled by conflict instability. It's reshaping demographics globally.
And here's where I started to get really concerned, because this isn't just happening over there, right? The source talks about the West, specifically the US and the UK becoming like destinations for people who are just desperate for a better life.
Yeah, and they use this powerful analogy of an overloaded rowboat. You've got the promise of stability, financial support, even things like free healthcare. In some Western countries, it's a huge draw for people coming from crisis zones. But these systems, these countries, they have limits.
It's like we're all in that same boat, and it's only a matter of time before.
It's a stark image, for sure, but it illustrates the point perfectly. Social services, infrastructure, even cultural identities are being strained by this influx of people. And the article argues this is already creating tension, real tension, and it's a trend to watch, especially in places like the US, the UK, where immigration is a very complex and very contentious issue already. It's like everyone's holding their breath. And this war in Ukraine, it's become like this focal point, bringing all these other tensions to the surface, things that have been simmering for years and now they're boiling over.
Like what? Give me an example, something concrete. What else is this war spotlighting?
Well, take the energy crisis in Europe, for one. They've relied on Russian gas for what feels like forever, and suddenly that's not so reliable. The war exposed that vulnerability, and now energy independence, that's top of the agenda. It's even reshaping alliances. Countries scrambling to secure their own energy sources.
So the war, it's like a catalyst then, speeding up changes that were already happening anyway.
Exactly. And another one, the global arms race. This conflict is like a testing ground for new weapons, military tech, the whole shebang. Every major power is flexing its muscles, and that makes the stakes even higher for everyone involved.
Okay, so energy weapons, it's all connected. But it still feels kind of abstract, like it's happening in some geopolitical strategy meeting, not in my neighborhood. How does any of this impact me directly?
That's a fair point. It's easy to feel disconnected from these global events. But the article argues these shifts have very real consequences for all of us. And one of the most obvious is inflation.
Oh, yeah, right? Like that bill coming due from all the money printing we talked about, like maxing out a credit card.
Yeah.
We're starting to see that happen.
Think about your last grocery store run or filling up your gas tank. Those prices are going up, right? That's inflation hitting your wallet directly. And as it continues, it eats away at what you can buy. It makes those basic necessities harder and harder to afford.
Yeah, I've noticed my grocery bill's getting bigger. But is it really all connected to the war?
The war is a factor for sure, but it's more accurate to say it's part of this whole web of interconnected systems. The conflict, it just adds fuel to the fire of those existing economic problems, which then ripple outward, impacting everything, supply chains, energy prices.
Yeah.
And as those costs go up, so does that bill we were talking about. And the source makes a pretty strong case that this isn't just an economic problem. It could lead to social unrest. People get desperate when they can't afford the basics. And that desperation, it can manifest in some pretty unpredictable ways.
So what can we do? Is there any way out of this mess? The article mentioned this BRICS alliance. Is that the solution?
The article presents it as an alternative.
Yeah.
It's this group of nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and they're making moves to create a whole different financial system, one that challenges the U.S. dollar's dominance.
Okay, that's a big deal, but how would that even work?
The key is they're moving towards a system where currencies are backed by gold.
Okay, so instead of dollars, we'd be using gold bars. That seems a little impractical.
No, not actual gold bars changing hands, but the idea is that the value of their currencies would be directly linked to the price of gold, which could theoretically create more stability and prevent governments from just printing more money when they get in trouble.
Okay, so it's like a gold standard then. Gotcha. But that's a huge shift. What are the downsides?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Hmm.
Some experts say a gold-backed system could actually stifle economic growth because it limits a government's ability to respond to crises. Others worry it would give too much power to those countries that have big gold reserves already.
So two sides to that BRICS coin. Not a silver bullet solution then.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's way too early to say what the long-term consequences of a BRICS-led financial system would be. It's definitely something to keep an eye on because it has the potential to reshape the entire global balance of power.
Okay, so we've got this war exposing all these cracks in the system, a potential financial shakeup brewing, and no easy answers in sight. Honestly, it's a lot.
It is a lot to process, for sure. But I think the key takeaway from all this, at least for me, is that even with these massive global shifts, we still have choices. We're not just along for the ride.
I like the sound of that. But what does that even look like when we're talking about issues this big? I can't exactly solve the war in Ukraine or stop a global recession.
Exactly. You don't have to. The article actually makes a really interesting point about focusing on your local community. It argues that instead of getting overwhelmed by these huge global challenges, we should look for ways to make a difference closer to home.
So shifting our focus from global to local, I get how that feels less daunting, but what does that actually look like in practice?
Think about it this way. What are you passionate about? What skills or resources do you have? Who are the people in your community already doing great work?
So it's about finding your niche, using what you're good at to contribute where you can.
Exactly. Maybe you're an amazing gardener who can help start a community garden to address food insecurity. Or maybe you're a tech whiz who can teach digital literacy skills to seniors. Or maybe you're just a really good listener who can offer support and connection to those who need it.
I see what you mean. Even those small actions multiplied across communities can make a real impact.
Exactly. And the article reminds us that even those small acts have a ripple effect. One conversation can spark a new idea. One act of kindness can inspire another. It's about tapping into that collective power for good, starting right where we are.
We really went to some pretty dark places in this deep dive, but I'm actually feeling, dare I say it, optimistic. Maybe there's hope after all.
I'd say so. The world is messy and complicated and full of challenges for sure, but it's also full of really amazing, resilient people who are working to make it a better place. And the more we understand the bigger picture, the better equipped we are to play our own small part in creating a brighter future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, if you're feeling inspired, don't let that feeling fade. Talk to someone about what you learned today. Look for ways to get involved in your community. And remember, even those small steps can make a big difference. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.